Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the very last session of day one. It was an action-packed and very insightful day here that we had at the Berlin Global Dialogue. And of course, we're going to continue in this spirit, and we're going to end day one equally insightful, equally interesting. My speakers are a guarantee that this will be so. Ladies and gentlemen, this session is titled Redefining Global Cooperation in a Multipolar Age. A lot to talk about with four outstanding speakers. To my immediate right, he's the Minister of Economy and Finance of Greece. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Kyriakos Pierrakakis. And I'm very delighted to my immediate left to welcome the CEO of Personal and Private Banking of the Standard Bank Group, a leading financial services provider that supports Africa's growth and development. Funeka, Montjane, ladies and gentlemen. Also somebody who has traveled very far to be with us here today at the Berlin Global Dialogue, all the way from Sao Paulo, is the CEO of Minerva Foods, a leader in beef export in South America, selling its products to more than 100 countries, and it is based in Brazil. Fernando, Queiroz is here, ladies and gentlemen. And last but certainly not least, we have the Senior Vice President. She's the Chief Legal and Public Affairs Officer at Booking.com, Maria Barros. Great to have you with us. Minister, since this morning, since the discussions have kicked off here on day one, we've talked repeatedly about how traditional alliances are giving way to new and often unexpected coalitions. And these new partnerships are obviously redrawing the map of global influence. As a Minister of Economy and Finance, what concrete examples do you see out there?
First of all, I vividly remember something that the late Joe Nye had said. He used to be my professor back in the days. And he said that the defining trends of the 21st century are going to be two. One of them is going to be power transition from the west to the east. And the second one is going to be power diffusion towards other actors. And apart from the transition geographically, you also see this regionally, but it's quite vivid when you have to tackle a crisis. It's quite vivid in any issue-specific problem-solving that you need to develop. We experienced that a lot during COVID. It was a very close collaboration in COVID-19 between industry, between private and public actors at the same time, to be able to deliver vaccines at speed and at scale. We experience it at every big challenge of this century, and we're trying to do that as a country a lot. We're trying to be a bridge economy between Europe, Asia, the Middle East, Africa, but we're also trying to do this thematically. And strategic investments, I think, are the catalysts of building bridges and of developing relationships in our century. I think that Greece is, one would say, I've seen this in international media, punching above your weight. I say we're punching at the weight where we should be, and we're continuously developing those bridges. This year, we're going to record FDI in those 8 months so far. We have our best performance even annually, and this is happening exactly because we have this culture, this mindset. And final point on your question, we speak a lot in Europe about the Savings and Investment Union. It's one of those topics where in every ECOFIN, in every Eurogroup, we're discussing institutional reforms. It's not only about the institutional reforms, it's about the specific cross-border mergers and acquisitions that we need to do and we need to deliver in order to be able to deploy growth in the context of a single market. We don't need 27 efficient markets, we need one efficient market. And the only way this can happen is if we as governments foster the private actors to be able to catalyze the cross-border M&As. So Euronext's proposed acquisition of the Athens Stock Exchange is such a project for us. UniCredit's proposed equity increase in Alpha Bank in Greece is one such case. Overall, we're open, we're back as a country, and we want to catalyze those relationships.
Greece is open, Greece is back, and it's very good to hear that Greece is neither punching above and thankfully not below its weight, but it's punching right at the weight that it belongs to. Europe needs a strong Greece, and thank you for your initial remarks. Also love that you got to squeeze in the late Joseph Nye. He's a legend that we've lost this year. But Funeka, of course, we're talking again about redefining global cooperation in a multipolar multipolar age. You're based in South Africa, another very emerging, increasing force on the international scene. As the CEO of Personal and Private Banking of the Standard Bank Group, what concrete examples have you seen and have you implemented as far as redefining that cooperation is?
Sure, thank you. So firstly, just to talk a bit about Standard Bank, 21 countries, almost Cape to Cairo, just one country that's remaining there, which is Sudan, but essentially very much see ourselves as part of driving the growth across the continent. What's been interesting, if you take the example, you'll know that a lot of our countries would have experienced some sort of stress from a sovereign debt perspective. It's been incredible to see where the refinancing of some of that has come from. It didn't necessarily all come from the IMF. Quite a big part of it came from the Gulf states. Because as you can imagine, sort of 5 out of 7 big sovereign funds are actually there. So that's the example of trying to really solve ultra-specific problems that really improves lives of people on the ground, but being able to access capital and flow of goods from all over the place.
Yeah, and certainly we had and we still have, I believe, the Minister of Economy of Saudi Arabia here today at this conference. Yeah. It just gets to show the Gulf region now being interested in getting involved in Africa. Those are the kind of cooperations and partnerships that perhaps 10, 20 years were unthinkable. So it's certainly a lot of moving needles there.
Indeed, and it's a question, for me, it's a question of being both global and local, making sure that whatever we're doing, it's not a religious experience or a name or a fad. It's actually about solving the lives of people, of countries in which we exist, but understanding that no country is an island, and therefore we need to pull together resources to solve the problem.
Yeah, I think that's become abundantly clear. Certainly no country is an island. We've heard from a European representative, we've heard from an African representative. Let's switch continents here. Let's go to South America, another very, very important continent, and Brazil, obviously a very important country. But Fernando, Minerva Foods, you are operating in more than 100 countries, and therefore you are best equipped to tell us how the needle is right now switching and moving in Brazil, but also in South America. You're dealing with every single one of those countries.
South America is a basis for us to produce what we do better. In terms of competitiveness, due to the natural resources that we have, allow us to be present all over the world. But I think what's important is to see the new countries that are taking protagonism in the global scenario. If you take the G7, that are the traditional countries, United States, Canada, Japan, and 4 European countries, you're going to see a new group that we call the E7, that are countries that are emerging markets, that are emerging economies, that are getting more important. And this is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Indonesia, Mexico, Turkey. These countries have a growth rate much bigger than the G7. The G7 average growth is 1.7% per year, while the E7 have a growth of 3.5% per year. If you take a long period of time, you're going to see the difference in how these new protagonists are important in the world. And one important thing about these new protagonists is that food is one of the things that is very relevant. While for the G7, only 10% of the family income goes to food. You go to the E7, the countries that are coming, 40% of the family incomes goes to food. So this is a matter of food security. We are talking about weapons on the previous panel, and more food, it's weaponize it, but also it's a way of reducing the social inequality that exists.
Yeah, it's very interesting to hear and listen to you. Obviously, Minerva Foods probably in more traditional times would have very much focused on its traditional markets in South America, but it's very clear listening to you that you are expanding broadly all over the world, so tapping into markets that you have previously perhaps not explored. Again, proving once again taken the point that we are dealing with an age that brings up new partnerships, and that is certainly something, Maria Barros from Booking.com, that you, as a very successful company, probably also feel on a daily basis.
Yeah, and not everybody is aware of this, but Booking.com was born in the Netherlands by Dutch entrepreneurs in 1996. So we talk about it. It's the old internet company because it was in the beginning. And we need more European tech success stories like that. And I think what has changed, as we were discussing, is the network of cooperation is more complex than ever, and it's in our nature because we are a two-sided platform. So on one side we are dealing with our partners, the hotels, and on the other side the customers. But more and more regulators, governments, NGOs are also part of the conversation because everything we do has a societal impact. And I think when you ask about how things have changed, I would say is that all the geopolitical scenarios that we are living in are now part of the boardroom more than ever before.
Yeah, certainly. I think the distinction between business and politics and business and geopolitics, that's long over. Whatever this gentleman to my right decides affects every one of you here around the table, but also vice versa, Minister.
I was ready to say, also vice versa. And in a sense, we had discussions about sovereignty today. We speak about sovereignty a lot vis-à-vis data, vis-à-vis the data platforms. And if you look at the conception of sovereignty, it's a 1648 conception. It's the Treaty of Westphalia, which basically posits that you have external autonomy and internal hierarchy. Those boundaries are not there. They were never there in the first place 100%. In Europe, we have decided to pool our sovereignty. But in reality, in every decision, it's vice versa by definition, because any capacity-building decision on behalf of a state is a function of relationships that can be built with private actors, with the private sector, with NGOs. So in this regard, what we should be doing is trying to leverage those relationships and unleash their full potential to achieve the levels of growth which you mentioned, which are manifest in many places of the world. They are less manifest in other places. Yep. And every country in the world should be having a specific KPI. How, given our demographics and how, given our productivity, can we do what we can to increase that growth rate to its highest potential level?
And given that we've talked a lot today also here around this table from this morning on about Europe's influence, since we are talking about emerging regional partnerships that are reshaping global influence and decision-making, you think Europe's seat around a table is decreasing, its influence globally is decreasing? We have Brazil here, we have South Africa here, we have the entire world in this room. Perhaps previously focusing very much on what Europe does. You think that's still the case?
I would actually reverse your question and say that your influence is not a function of your size as it used to be, or it's not a function of your tradition as it used to be. It's a function of your connections. And we should try to unleash those connections internationally, and we should try to actually limit the barriers that exist domestically. So Europe has many low-hanging fruits. We were discussing about tariffs with the government of the United States, and we had a negotiation on tariffs. Our position as a government, by the way, was that we should have ideally had the zero-to-zero environment. This was not achieved. But what was achieved was a specific deal on the table, which is better from having no deal on the table. It's better because it removes uncertainty. But what Mario Draghi was saying at that point, and Enrico Letta and others, was, amongst other things, repeating an IMF calculation, that we're speaking about tariffs in Europe, but we have barriers that exist between ourselves. There are barriers between Greece and Italy, between Germany and Greece. 110% equivalent in services of an equivalent tariff, 45% in manufacturing. So what should Europe do? Eliminate all of those barriers, develop the savings and investment union. Don't be afraid of integrating the market. Don't be afraid of doing those cross-border M&As that I mentioned before, and unleash and establish international relationships like the ones that you mentioned before with other continents.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, feel free to clap. Don't hold back. Funeka, it's very interesting to me. When I look at Africa, I'm seeing a lot of countries that have received the wake-up call, in the sense that China is certainly very active on the African continent. Turkey as a country is very active, and so on and so forth. At this point, neglecting and ignoring Africa is at your own peril, isn't it? Do you feel that we in this part of the world have gotten the message?
No, we absolutely think so. We think that Africa is going to continue to grow faster than the world economies. So not only sub-Saharan Africa, but all of Africa, including North Africa. So we are growth. Secondly, we still have the population dividend. And yeah, one might say that in the world of AI, what is the worth of this dividend? But what we do know is that if you look at the giant called Amazon, and you look at the story of Amazon Web Services, you'll find a story of Cape Town, and certain individuals getting permission from the CEO to go and start and scale a new business that became now the giant of AWS. So we think that Africa will remain the part of the source of incredible talent that solves the world differently. Having said that, we are very clear. I mean, if I were to quote the words of the founder of Free African Countries, being Kwame Nkrumah, it was very clear that we as Africans, we look neither to the east nor the west. We look forward. And that's been that's how we are managing here.
Yeah, absolutely. Africa is very much looking forward, very dynamic region. I think we all know this from everyone who has been there, can attest firsthand. But the same goes for South America, of course, as well, Fernando. And again, please jump right in.
No, first on Africa. The world is reducing its speed of growth in terms of population. Out of the 10 countries that will grow, 5 are in Africa. So Africa presents, in the next 20 years, the biggest growth of population. And the hold that South America has on it is to provide food in an affordable way for all the countries. South America has unique competitive advantages in terms of weather, in terms of water availability. The biggest challenge and the biggest scarcity that we will see in the world is water. And what South America can do is to produce food and biofuel. That is also a big worry that we have on the energy transition. So South America is the natural producer of food and biofuel. So our presence globally will only increase. And to the minister's point, I think one of the things that is most important is that the governments being allied with the private sector, because governments can do and say things that the private sector cannot, and vice versa. So when we are aligned in our objectives, in our strategy, in our goals, we tend to succeed much faster and with much more emphasis.
Yeah, and I think you, of everyone here, Maria, you embody really what we are talking about. You're a Brazilian who's working for a Dutch company, sitting in Berlin now, talking on an international stage, really redrawing the map of global influence. This is what we're talking about here, where it used to be size, it perhaps used to be weapons, and certainly those still matter, but a small country like Qatar, UAE, or even Saudi Arabia, they can all make their impact felt on a day-to-day basis. For you, as a business representative, how is it being impacted on a daily basis? These drawing influences and these changing influences.
These changing influences. No, it's a very good question. I think that on my day-to-day, as I mentioned, the geopolitics has entered the boardroom. So I would like to say at Booking.com, let's double-click on that. So what I mean there is a lot more scenario planning based on geopolitical situation than before. I think before I used to work in the beer industry, and it was a lot about supply chain issues that you would be thinking about. And nowadays you think so much more about geopolitical turmoil and how one region influences the other. And I think it's very important for business to take a long-term view there. And going back to your point in relation to Europe, Booking a big part of our business is in Europe, so we are supporters of innovation and supporting Europe in its, as you said, in the Draghi report on the European competitiveness. But we also think it's important to, as the previous panel was talking about, simplifying regulation. It cannot be all about regulation, and also supporting innovation and also financing for small and medium-sized companies as well. Sure. And it's not to say that we are against regulation. We are pro-smart regulation, but it has to be targeted and creating the environment that we need to grow.
Yeah, it's interesting. Perhaps before somebody like you, or even you, Funeka, and Fernando as well, the first section that you would read in a newspaper would be the business section. I think now you are sort of drawn, Minister, we are in a very fast-paced geopolitical environment we're all living in. You certainly are at the forefront of it as a minister of an important European country. Do you think that both public-private partnerships, politics, companies like those who are around the table, are we equipped to keep up with this pace?
I mean, overall, geopolitics has entered the boardroom, as you said, but I would also say that the boardroom has entered geopolitics. And to a very large extent, this was the case, traditionally, historically speaking. At some point in the 20th century, we saw a rise in state capabilities, especially post-World War II. But right now, given how innovation is spread out and given how many actors are catalyzing innovation, by definition, you need to have this mosaic, this puzzle, which you need to navigate in order to get the best possible result. Are we equipped? I would say that we have two existential challenges in front of us as states, as governments. The first one is demographics, which you mentioned before. Currently in Europe, probably, if I'm not mistaken, no country has the replacement rate in fertility. And having said this, this is important for finance ministers, because if you look at the 20th century, countries that grew with high levels of growth, like the ones that you mentioned before, typically had an increase in the economically active population, more than 2%. In Europe right now, we have a decrease in the overall population in every country, let alone the economically active population. So this is one parameter which will drive the 21st century, together with the fact that you will have an increase in life expectancy, probably. I mean, given the trend and given how we expect the trend to continue. That's number one. Number two, is the exponential innovation curve which we're facing. And we always had creative destruction, as Schumpeter said. We always had technological innovation. The difference after the 1750s is that you had this exponential curve after the first industrial revolution. And now the scale, the curve itself is becoming even more acute. The pace accelerates. Typical innovations from horses to cars, they took decades. The impact of ChatGPT, of OpenAI, of machine learning, of LLMs, it's going to be in the months. So you have this exponential curve. You have a linear understanding, typically, of the world around you, we as human beings, and you have the political systems, which is your question, which react sublinearly. Why? Because we have institutional setups, softwares, political softwares, which belong to another century, fundamentally speaking. You can see that in the gridlock in many countries. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to adapt our software. We have the hardware. Adapting our software requires us to change the way we behave in complex problems.
How do we do that?
Coalitions. I mean, this table represents it to a very large extent. You have people from all over the world, and you have actors from many places, from the private sector, from technology, from banks, from the food industry. You need those diverse coalitions, because that's the optimum way to regulate. That's the optimum way to have the states play their role, as it should be. You need to have that dialogue. We cannot do that independently. We cannot operate as governments, isolated from the private space. And our experience in Greece is that in the areas where we were the most successful, were the areas where we had those dialogues and those discussions, where we reverse engineered the ask. We were trying to get investments from the hyperscalers, say, from Microsoft, Amazon, and Google. And what enabled those investments was a simple question. What would enable you to pick us? And we started from a point where we were in the 301 list of the US Secretary of Trade, If you ask me what's the 301 list, I answer it's a list that you don't want to be on. We were on that list, and now, some years later, we have investments from all the hyperscalers. So you can't do that, but you need that dialogue to happen first.
Yeah, and that's why we're so grateful that we are here at the Berlin Global Dialogue. A very opportune, very timely roundtable discussion here with the emphasis on the importance of dialogue with all sectors involved, obviously private sectors such as yourself, as well as the government, technology, and so on and so forth. But the question, Funeka, still remains. We do live in very volatile times, do we? As a very experienced woman at the forefront of business, is this the most challenging period in your own professional life?
Yeah, I mean, I've been in banking for the last 18 years, which meant that I lived through the global financial crisis, COVID, and all of that. I think I agree with the minister that the pace of change has just, what you thought was true yesterday is different. So we have to exist within a volatile, fast-changing place and have strategic agility. That's what it's required. You know, if you're in the private sector, in some ways, I agree with the minister, you almost a speedboat, but in the context of the fact that there's a carrier nearby. So you need to make sure that the private sector and the public sector work really closely together. So if I were to give a very simple example, and this example might exaggerate things a little bit. If you are in Botswana, chances are you're selling your beef to Europe, and then Angola is buying it and it's coming back. So what do you need? African free trade agreement, and you also need massive infrastructure spend that connects Botswana and Angola, which are right next to one another. And you also need to then financing, and when you do that, then small and medium-sized and large businesses can trade with one another. So, and therefore, these new coalitions then start being far more relevant to the lives of people on the ground.
Yeah, those coalitions, yes. These newly emerging coalitions that we're talking about and trying to examine and explore here around this table. Fernando, you've talked already about how your business has grown and has looked beyond South American borders a long time ago, and you've been better off for it. But again, the question about volatility, that must also hit you.
I think it's not only volatility, it's uncertainty, it's ambiguity and complexity. The scenarios are much more complicated all over the world. And
give us a specific example. How has your job become more complex, say, in the last 5 years?
I would say that one of the things that back 20 years ago was about nearshoring. As you do business, who is close to you, where logistics is efficient. Now it's about trust shoring. Trust shoring means the alignment, especially between governments, that you do business not with the logic, the economics, but with the logic of who is aligned on the way of thinking that you have. So more and more, this is happening, especially in a polarized world. And I think here, for us, it's the example of our two main markets is United States and China. So could not be more polarized. This shows that the private sector can try to reduce the volatility of being much more pragmatic in the way of constructing its relationships and bringing the governments on board.
Yeah, please, jump right in, Marta.
So I'm just thinking through this question, and I would say, I would think about three things that I've been thinking a lot lately. One is about the skills that you need to hire. There's a lot of talk about hiring for AI skills, for example, but I actually think that also public-private partnerships and the governance and decision-making on those is going to be an area that's going to become more and more important. And having people that are good at that, and sometimes having people that have been in both sectors, in the private and public sector, can also be very helpful because you understand each other's world. The second point, this was a point that I really liked that was made in the previous panel on regulation about the risk mindset. I think that's very important that we adopt an experimental mindset, because it's so uncertain that the only way to learn is to try things, iterate, and try again. And one thing that has been very empowering to us at Booking internally, I can say in my day-to-day job, is thinking about decisions, and I think it's Jeff Bezos that speak about reversible and irreversible decisions. A lot of the decisions are reversible. So I think we should have the courage to try different things and capture the learnings from that. And I think the the last point I would say in terms, I agree with what Fernando said about on the supply chain side. I think if you asked me 5, 10 years ago, we would think a lot about the logistical cost, getting the best price, put everything in one vendor, you have higher volumes, you get bigger discounts, and everybody would be happy. I think now companies are looking at this completely different. They are willing to pay a little bit more, but having suppliers in different places to diversify and hedge yourself. So that's a very concrete thing that I think has changed how people think about the business.
I fully agree. I think the best hedge that the companies have is the geographic diversification. You never know what is going to happen to one country, what kind of free trade agreement they will do or will not do, what kind of tariffs could be implemented. So the best hedge, and this is something that is new on this world, as geographic diversification provides the best hedge for this volatile new globe.
But you can do the best foresight and predictions as you want. If President Trump decides he doesn't like President Lula, he slaps some tariffs on it, and there you go. There goes Minerva Foods.
Yeah, exactly. But this is a very good example. If you take we were informed today that Mr. Trump is favorable to Argentina. So he gave concessions to Argentina that was not given to Brazil. So by being present in different places allows us to move and arbitrage the volatility that exists in the market.
Well, I think Trump's meeting with Lula at the UN, I think, softened things. After that, I think previously he was more of a Bolsonaro fan. But let's leave that aside. That's for another subject matter. But I do want to give you an opportunity, Minister, also to talk about the strategic tools that government and businesses have to use these build new coalitions. We talked about public-private collaboration. You've already talked about it before, but Maria brought it up, and I want you to sort of pick up from where she left off.
As a first point prior to that, I think that what was discussed before is the best definition of how we should understand sovereignty in 21st century terms, because you spoke about hedging, and in reality to be sovereign in the 21st century is to be anti-fragile. And this requires you to hedge your bets. We don't like baseball a lot in Europe, but there's this phenomenal movie called Moneyball. So we should understand Moneyball for politics, Moneyball for the economy. How can you think in terms of points and in terms of minimizing risk, especially in an era of high uncertainties? Now, to your question, there are many potential ways to capture this, many potential institutional designs to capture this. You mentioned before the startup industry. There, you had Nadia Calvino speaking here this morning from the EIB. The European Investment Fund played a huge role, for instance, to catalyze innovation in my country, in Greece, especially during the years of crisis, even before my government came in. And we created a small venture capital ecosystem, a small angel investor ecosystem, leveraging EU funds from the European Investment Fund. This had hybrid financing. That's one way to move forward. Another one is strategic industrial partnerships, where you do this together with regulation, together with creating the proper regulatory space in the deployment, in the development. There are many potentialities to regulate on certain areas while creating the proper infrastructure. To create data pools, for instance, where with the proper regulatory design, you give the opportunities to the private sector to innovate. And in Europe, we have those discussions a lot. We have had a discussion about stable coins, for instance, recently, where we're debating how technology will disrupt the banking system and the monetary system. And in my view, those shouldn't really be dilemmas. They should be surgical, institutional approaches. And how do you specifically target and define your regulatory approach? In this regard, you both need a public anchor and you need private innovation around the public anchor. Our role should be to be regulatory states. We should cut red tape, but we shouldn't necessarily deregulate. We should eliminate excess regulations that exist, but we should have a very clear value set vis-a-vis what we want to achieve.
So it's quite a balancing act here for everyone here around this table and beyond. Good shout out for Moneyball, a good movie, by the way, with Brad Pitt. I do recommend it. The Berlin Global Dialogue wants us to be rather concrete as far as the key takeaways are concerned. So before I open up and give the microphone, open it up for questions from the audience, Funeka, perhaps starting with you. Give me one way specifically in which regional partnerships are proving more effective than traditional multilateral institutions.
I spoke earlier about the African new trade agreement. I think that it's an early stage of it, but I do believe that Africans doing business with one another actually can open up that market, where instead of illogical trade paths, but people actually can do trade business with one another. It requires government to come to the party around tariffs. It requires infrastructure spend. It requires, more importantly, energy spend that is not there. And that's another opportunity where the public and the private can work with one another. So that's quite a concrete example of a region coming together and opening up actual trade.
Yeah, very good. Fernando, let's get you a concrete example about how regional partnerships are proving more effective than multinational, or rather traditional multilateral institutions.
Most of the political blocks, they are getting more heterogeneous. So one way of gaining agility is going to more bilateral agreements between the countries. This creates much more identity between two countries. It's much more difficult to organize one bloc and negotiating with another bloc. So it's not the ideal, but it's a way of moving forward in a much faster and more efficient way.
Very good. Maria, I think you already had mentioned a couple, but to give me one concrete and specific one.
I think the relationship that we have developed over the years with the Dutch government and the Dutch regulators it has been very fruitful, I think, for both parties in the sense of helping the Netherlands become a tech hub in Amsterdam with lots of companies coming in, and it gets you in a flywheel. The more companies that come in, more then you have suppliers for these companies, and we continue to see that. And I also would say attracting talent. A lot of the people that we brought from all over the world, we have more than 100 nationalities in our office in Amsterdam, something that I'm very proud of, came to work with us, and sometimes they stay 3-4 years, and then they leave, but they don't leave the Netherlands, they stay there. So we are constantly in conversations with the government on how to continue that journey.
Absolutely. Amsterdam, not a bad place to live, I think.
No, it's not. But sometimes it's hard to convince people to move there, believe it or not.
Well, perhaps it's the winters. I don't know.
Or does rain.
The rain. Minister, also, you've already mentioned a couple, but one specific way in which regional partnerships are proving more effective than traditional multilateral institutions.
Well, first of all, traditional multilateral institutions create culture, and they are sticky, they last. So those are the positive points, and within them you can innovate. For instance, the policies that I described before on interacting with the hyperscalers, our public cloud first policy, which we have in Greece, is a policy innovation in the context of European institutions. So I'm leaving that aside. On top of this, I mentioned that Greece is a bridge economy. We're trying to foster connections. We have fostered those connections with the Middle East. Our interconnector project with Saudi Arabia is such an example. Our bilateral relationship with India is such an example. But overall, I think that we should try to do policy innovations. We typically, when we think of innovation, we typically think of invention. But innovation has a much broader scope. It can be policy innovation, process innovation. And I want to mention one example, if I may, which is the policy that we developed on 5G. Where we had a spectrum auction. We reserved a portion of the auction for free access to startups and many innovative companies in Greece. And we reserved 25% of the proceeds to develop a public fund which co-invests with the private sector on 5G applications, because we understood that innovation and value would come from the private sector and from those applications. But what I just described as a Greek example is a policy failure for Europe. Because if we think about it, we should have had one auction in Europe, not 27. We should have had one regulator where we would have leveraged our advantage in telecom. Because if you think of what happened during the first Trump administration, there was a big competition on 5G infrastructure, which adversely helped European companies because there was no American competitor on the ground. Did we leverage that competitive advantage back then to develop an ecosystem around 5G where we had the advantage? It's not a debate of developing an advantage where you don't have it. Typically in Europe, when we use the terminology, let's create a European version of X, this is policy failure 101. We should think inversely. How can I capacity build my advantage where I have it? And there we did have it. Can we still do it? I think we can do it. But we need to be smart about how we can develop those policy innovations.
Yeah, we certainly do. I think that's become abundantly clear throughout the day. Let's open up. Let's bring in some questions here from the audience. And as always, the first question goes to a representative from the BGD, from the Berlin Global Dialogue, Young Voices, of which there are quite a few. Microphones, I think, are being passed around. So if you feel you're equipped, yes, please take the mic, introduce yourself quickly.
Hello. Hello, good afternoon. My name is Juliana. I'm from Brazil. I'm representing FGV from São Paulo, Brazil. And I'm also a coordinator in an NGO that is called Pact Against Hunger Institute in São Paulo. And my question is, Europe has long relied on Latin America for key commodities, but historical trade patterns have often reinforced dependency and uneven development. As new global alignments emerge, what assessment criteria should guide European-Latin American partnerships to ensure they are generally win-win? So promoting sustainable economic growth, strengthening local industries, reducing inequality, and supporting broader social and environmental development objectives in partner countries.
Thank you so much. We have a big Brazilian contingency here around. I love it. I love it. Fernando, this seems like a question that is catered for you.
No, I think it's a very important point that you touched. We are taking a few steps. The agreement between European Union and Mercosur, it's been very close to be approved. We see that this is a step to increase the trade without the barriers. I think that the way of creating a win-win situation is by taking the best of what each country has. Is what is the real vocation? We go to David Ricardo. What is the vocation of the nations? And definitely South America, as I said before, we are very efficient on the agro industry in general, both on renewable fuel, on biofuel, and on producing food. And from the European side, having food and energy that's more affordable is definitely a way of creating positive dynamics between the countries.
Right. Thank you so much. Do we have any more questions? I also believe, yes, please, right here in the first row. Microphone is coming to you, and please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Annette. I'm from Oerlikon Textile Industry Machine Buildery. And I have a question, as all of you bring a lot of experience in. What is something that you would love to have known at the beginning of your career about cooperation, but something that you have learned over time?
Very good question indeed. Funeka, what would you have liked to know from the onset of your career that you know now?
Yeah, I think that it's really the importance of being an equal partner on the table. Because I think if you think about the continent where I come from, and I think about the question that was asked by the young leaders, the best way to get the best deals is to have a really good proposition, and also to make sure that you are a strong partner. So I think that what I'm much more obsessed now than what I was before in my earlier career is about how do we strengthen our countries internally so that they become really powerful competitors and they bring powerful propositions to the world economy.
Yeah. Maria, do you also want to answer Annette's question?
I agree with everything you said, so I'll take a different direction. I think one of my biggest learnings was, because I'm in the tech industry, was how to learn that language and understand how tech engineers think. You know, I'm a lawyer, engineers think in terms of systems. It's a very different, their brains are wired differently. And I think I underestimated that. One thing that we've spoke a lot about at Booking's history, Booking used to be very siloed internally in how, like, you know, each person get focused on doing one thing, and that has been very successful, but it's one of those stories, what gets you here doesn't get you there. And I think cross-functional collaboration is something that it's quite hard to do, but it's very needed. And when I take that to the state level, I think when you're thinking about regulation and incentives of technology, I think it's also very important to understand how technology is built, right? Because also going back to the geopolitical piece and globalization, one of the challenges is that many times your technology stack has to be the same everywhere. There's limits on how much you can localize, or it requires quite a bit of effort to localize. And I think that gets sometimes underestimated. We are constantly in discussions with governments. They want to ask us to change one thing in our website. Unfortunately, it's not like just click on a switch and everything changes. Sometimes it involves 60 different teams. So technology is complex, and I think it's very important to better understand that to be effective.
It has to be bulletproof. That's why people like you are there to make sure that the judicial...
Nothing is bulletproof.
Well, to make sure the judicial aspect at least is covered. Fernando, I think the questions were for the CEOs here around the table about what you have learned throughout your career that you would have liked to know from the onset.
I think that one important thing is that the knowledge that each generation has. If you are able to have a team that you have multiple generations and you are able to listen from all of them, their perspectives, creates a very rich picture for you and allow you to move with more agility by knowing the traps, the opportunities, the eagerness to do, and this comes from a mix of generations.
Minister, the CEOs were asked, but I can't help but wonder what you know now as the Minister of Economy and Finance that you would have liked to know when you first took this position.
I will expand the question a little bit, if I may.
Please.
I will expand it in two ways. On a personal note, if there is one thing that I learned in the last 6 years when we were designing policies and regulations, especially in times of crisis. We went into office, we came into office in 2019. I was digital minister back then. And if one had told us that in the next 4 years you will have a global pandemic, war at the European border, certain supply chain crisis, inflation, spike in energy, it would be something which we would have never anticipated. So in this regard, if there is one core lesson for every policymaker in the world, I think that typically when we design policies, we have an economist in the room and the lawyer in the room. You also need to have someone who understands technology in the room. Unless you have that, you cannot design policies properly in the 21st century. And the expansive note on the question is the national side. I represent the government here. I represent the country which experienced hardship. We had to have 3 bailout programs, 3 IMF programs in Greece. We lost 25 points of our GDP in the last decade. We effectively had a lost decade. It's similar to having a Great Depression in 21st century terms. And this was a very expensive lesson to be had. So right now we have trust, we have credibility, and we have an innovative mindset. But it cost us a lot to get there. So the lesson is for every country, every government in the world, don't pay that cost. You need to get your finances in order, and you need to be fast. You need to be agile. You need to be nimble, especially in 21st century terms, especially as the exponential curve of technology is becoming steeper.
And I think just to bring it back, trust, I think, is the same thing for the private sector. And it's that quote that trust takes years to build and it takes seconds to lose. I think that's very, very important.
Yeah, and you heard it from the minister. Get your house in order, you know, to be more resilient for if and when rougher times might be around the corner. Let's get him some more questions. It's very hard for me to turn around here, but if there are any, I also believe from the young voices, I believe I was given a couple of names. Do we have Desiree here from Hong Kong? Do we? No?
Well, Desiree is not here, but
you're speaking on her behalf?
No, I'm speaking on behalf of myself, actually.
Very good.
I'm Simpiwe, one of the young voices. I think one of my questions was submitted as well. I'm representing South Africa. I'm a proud South African, proud African from the University of Cape Town, Graduate School of Business. Thank you very much.
You brought your own fan club here.
And I think my question is really centered around Africa. And I think Funeka mentioned the importance of trade around Africa. And I think we can't ignore the fact that Africa is rising in influence as the years progress. And with the African Union's seat at the G20, as well as the expansion of BRICS, Africa is a big role player. So my question specifically is, what are 1 or 2 non-negotiable institutional reforms in global financial governance that new coalitions must champion to truly redefine global cooperation and create a fair, legitimate foundation for the Global South's sustainable development.
Wow.
Thank you very much.
It's a question presented as a recital.
Indeed.
I love it.
Let me start. I'm going to start a different direction. Let me start at home first. African countries have to get governance right. Every single country I go to, and I have the benefit of going to about 20 countries, is the same story. We have everything that it takes to win, but things don't always come together. So I think the first thing is that strategic strengthening of each of the countries, but also coming together, for example, using the umbrella of free trade. Because when we're in that position, we don't then have to take dodgy deals, for lack of a better word. We are in a much better position. So for me, the greatest challenge is for us to the minister's point, to strengthen and fortify ourselves. So that would be my first contribution.
Yeah, I think it's a very valid one. Is the answer satisfactory to you as a young voice?
I'm happy.
He's happy. That's good. We are talking here about redefining global cooperation in a multipolar age, but of course, Maria, we cannot overlook the fact that the trend, at least, is not moving in the direction, right? I mean, we are seeing an increase in protectionism. We're seeing an increase in nationalism all around the world. Of course, cooperation, global cooperation, is a desired outcome. It's a desired goal. It's something we all aspire to. But the tendencies on the ground do not necessarily reflect that. The facts look different, don't they?
It's true, but let me, before that we get into this grim reality, I think, there's polarization for sure. But at the same time, I wanted to mention this data point. Nearly 690 million people traveled internationally in the first half of 2025. And that's a 5% increase over last year. So cooperation is happening every day at the human level. And of course, I will say that as being part of a travel company, but we think that travel can be a force for good. And the reason for that is because, and there's actually research that says that the more countries one visits, the increased empathy that one has. And we like to talk about the Mark Twain famous quote that travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. So I would start with the first very quick tip of travel, and travel to places that are different to yours. But in terms of global collaboration, goes back to what we were discussing in terms of trying to find win-win partnerships between different countries, and then businesses also having to scenario plan as things go forward, and creating the conditions for investment in startups and development, especially in Europe. Because if we talk about the influence of Europe and the Brussels effect, I think the highest chance for Europe to have an influence in the rest of the world is having more economic growth.
Yeah. But the question, of course, still remains in that predictability is something that you're all craving and needing in order to execute your business successfully, also, of course, on the government front. But we all know we are in the age of unpredictability. We wake up in the morning and one tweet from a certain person can change everything. So I'm just trying to find out and get to the bottom of how you're dealing with these really the lack of predictability on a daily basis, also for the young emerging leaders here in the room.
So maybe three things just to add to what you've said. The first one is, and I think a lot about this, I think those of us who are around these tables have to accept that what was globalization has not quite delivered to everybody. Because a lot of what we're seeing that we think is destroying or is moving away from global cooperation comes from what one might call the will of the people. The people have voted those individuals who have come and taken a different way. So I do think we need to acknowledge that and therefore construct a different path and be part of constructing a different path. I think lastly then, I think it's really about not panicking, not picking up patterns where they don't exist, and being in the language of, I think it was in 1961, President Kennedy saying, it probably in a different context, of course, but it was also similar, that there might be a long night where we have to actually digest and see what happens. And in that meantime, you have to be awake and alert and participate and being able to deal with what the minister's calling, just being able to deal with that. So strategic flexibility, execution flexibility, risk management capability, flexibility is now the basic minimum of running. You accept what's happening, you don't get into a big boat, you surf until a trend emerges and you're part of it.
And without that flexibility, obviously your business model is outdated.
Indeed. Yeah. You're not on a boat, you're surfing.
Yeah.
That's what it is. So it's all about learning to surf. Yeah.
While the sea is pretty rough out there.
Yes, indeed.
Yes, Fernando.
I think risk management is a key factor, especially on the traditional industries, the traditional way, because everybody found a way of doing that particular business on how to proceed. It becomes much easier when you have new agendas that that can be explored together and that align the interest. Just like one of the pillars here is climate change. Climate change is a new agenda. It was not there 30 years ago. It was not there 20 years ago. This gives opportunity for new things like carbon credit markets. How this can be an alignment, how can this be a factor of aligning everybody among the same goal? So this is an example. For the traditional business, it will continue to have volatility. And the anti-fragile book and the anti-fragile thesis, it's a very good one. But the new agendas, they can be the catalyzer to align much more on the new challenges that we have ahead of us.
And the volatility, of course, specifically related to your business, can sometimes come from the changing of the zeitgeist, right? I mean, you are a leading beef exporter in South America at a time when perhaps beef or meat consumption is being vilified, where it's being pointed towards it's a major source of climate change. It's an ethical component to it. The younger generation perhaps are growing more vegan, vegetarian. You have to take all these things into consideration.
Exactly. And what we have in our company is that everything that we do in terms of climate change has to be scientific, has to be auditable, and has to be transparent. So this takes all the noise, because new things creates noise or creates different angles of looking. So with these three principles, we were able to move very fast in the agenda of decarbonization and measuring the carbon footprint.
Maria?
No, I was just going to say, thinking about the young generation, going back to the question about things that you've learned, I think decision-making in uncertain times is something that a lot of people have wrote a lot about. So I think right now, I've never before thought so much about the quality of decision-making, because we are making decisions sometimes in very short term, not having a lot of time to think, right? So it's easy to rush into things, and without taking into consideration opinion of experts and facts and look at it objectively. So I find it very important. So I've been reading a lot of books. There was like the Yellow Pad about decision-making on uncertain times, and reading, there's so many different things there that I think you can try to create a little bit more predictability in an unpredictable world by thinking about percentages, chances, and that's what I mean by scenario planning, to ensure that also bias is not coming into the conversation, and group thinking. I think that's one of the biggest dangers, is having a lot of group thinking when you're taking decisions. So just want to make that point.
Yeah, for certain. It's well taken. And clearly listening to all three of you, it takes very different, very specific skills as a CEO to thrive in the 21st century. I think maybe the curriculum of major MBA institutions have not adjusted as quickly as you had to do on a daily basis. Is that also the same as a politician, Minister? Do you think it takes a different skill set in the 21st century in these volatile times as a minister than, say, it did 20 years ago?
No. Clausewitz,
Next question.
I mean, strategy. Clausewitz on war. The generals should have a plan before entering the battlefield, but also an acute sense of the fact that the plan will be abandoned at the very moment that you enter the battlefield. Same thing, unpredictability. The question is, how much of it do you integrate in your daily life and in your daily policy-making decisions? And in this regard, again, from our experience, when we were elected in 2019 and Kyriakos Mitsotakis became Prime Minister of Greece, we had a dual mandate. On the one hand, we had unresolved issues, things that we had been debating for decades. How do you capture tax evasion in Greece? Well, we did that. We captured most of it, and we still have some work to do, but we're in the process. How do you reform your education system, your health system? And at the same time, you need to adapt and respond to all those emerging crises which you haven't predicted. And the way we did that, for instance, in COVID-19, in vaccination, we had a remit, we had a mandate to vaccinate the whole population and develop the plan in 8 weeks. Whereas, traditional IT procurement takes how long? 9 months, 1 year, and then deployment how long? 2 years, 1 year and a half, and it had to happen in 8 weeks. So how do you do that? Well, if you have the capacity building mindset and the engineer's mindset, I would say, of having a very specific KPI which you will meet, if you start thinking a lot like a CEO and trying to think in terms of building relationships and real-time solutions to problems which you haven't anticipated, then you're in the 21st century and you're doing your job properly.
You're more intellectual than I am. You quoted Clausewitz. I refer to the philosopher Mike Tyson, who once said, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face. So I guess they both probably mean the same thing, perhaps articulated in a different style. We are coming to the end of the session, but I do want a final round here. Again, we're talking, the session is titled Redefining Global Cooperation in a Multipolar Age. Funeka, starting with you. Nobody has a crystal ball here, but what you talked about resilience, you talked about foresight. What challenges do you foresee in the next months and years for you as a CEO?
It's resilience, understanding that this is not going away in 3-4 years, and having the stamina, the physical and emotional stamina that
is that something you can train, the stamina?
Yes, I think that stamina firstly starts for the acceptance of what is.
But that's a more Buddhist approach.
Acceptance of what is, and then making sure that you build in processes and tools to help people deal with their day-to-day. So I think what's the hardest is that the reformulation that is going to happen might not be as quick as we might be comfortable with, and we have to stay with it, while in the meantime making sure that their children are fed.
And Africa's path and role in this volatile future is, in your prediction, only going to grow in relevance?
I see so much positivity. So whenever people talk, for example, about climate change, I see access. So many people across the continent don't have access to energy. So now what's called renewable energy is new energy, can transcend all of that. Millions of kids that are coming through, a population dividend that comes through growth, huge level of informal markets. What I can see is an opportunity when a continent can play its rightful place in the world.
The minister has already pointed out that we in Europe, we have very severe demographic challenges. Africa is at the opposite end of the spectrum. Do you think that can also backfire?
It can, yeah, it depends on what we do with it. So if you think about, one might say, look at what happened in Kenya, maybe Morocco, etc. But as a betting person, I think that we have what it takes to turn that population dividend into a true talent dividend for the world, so that we can innovate to solve human problems. I'm convinced that the human problems of the world are going to be solved by African children.
And what new global corporations that we are not seeing at the moment in the year 2025 do you think could still arise in the future? Where do you still see potential?
Everywhere. So the first one is Africans within themselves. I think that the relationships with the West remains very important, perhaps on restructured terms, including Europe. But of course, Gulf states, China, that becomes a big part of it. And of course, my dear brother here, who's my neighbor, separated by the Atlantic Ocean, very, very important partners here.
Yeah, there you have it. Fernando, same question to you. alliances do you foresee that perhaps we now in 2025 cannot see and predict yet? What do you see on the horizon as a CEO whose product is reaching over 100 countries?
I think that, as we said in the beginning, there are new countries becoming more protagonists. And I think the first challenge that we have is that how to reduce the social inequality, especially on the basis of Maslow pyramid, that food is the basic part that needs to be solved. And I think that only will be solved if we get the countries that are producing together with the countries that are consuming. Because the challenge is not to produce, is to produce in a more affordable way that gives food in general much more democratic access. And I think this is the main challenge that we have, but it's also an opportunity.
And BRICS, very much like South Africa, is an important and rising member of BRICS. Brazil, of course, is a rising member. Do you feel your country is maximizing its potential, or do you still see a lot of room for improvement there?
I think there is room for improvement, but I think in this new order globally, there are more space for new leaders, new countries that are leading some of the agendas. So the agendas are more debated. The agendas are more, they become a bit more global.
And you feel Brazil will take its rightful place around the table in the years to come?
It is taken.
And South America as a continent?
South America will have some challenges because you have the different political spectrum on it. So there is still some, we need to be more homogeneous on the thought, even though we can have different political systems.
Very good. Maria, also give us your outlook and the partnerships that you still see on the horizon, potential that has not been maximized. Curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I don't want to make too much about AI, but I need to talk a little bit about it.
Please do. It's an important.
It's an opportunity and a challenge at the same time. And being a business that is born and raised in Europe, for us, we think it's very important that we have the conditions to innovate as fast as we need. And we are concerned that we are not going to be able to innovate at the speed that we would like. And if it's difficult for us, it can be even harder for small, medium-sized companies. So that's when you ask, like, what's top of your mind? That's one of the things. And the second is, how can we collaborate big business and small businesses together? And when you talk about productivity in Europe, there's been a good case here on the travel sector of collaboration with between hotels and digital platforms, where digital platforms have given hotels more visibilities, and at the same time, hotels give the whole business, right? So we depend on each other in a fruitful way. And what could be these type of collaborations that could happen in other sectors? But digital skills will be essential for the future, and I worry about speed. So I think I don't have one day in my life at Booking that I'm not getting pressured about how to make things move faster. And it's not just about regulation, of course, but I think in relation to regulation, one of the challenges is the potential conflicts of regulations between one country and the other. And if you want to be compliant, and I think sometimes people think, oh, SMEs don't have the same issue. No, I think SMEs also want to be compliant. It can get extremely complicated for that. So how do you create those conditions to accelerate? That's the biggest concern that we have.
Is AI a blessing or a curse for a company like Booking.com?
I would say it's more of a blessing than a curse, but yes, it can be a challenge in terms of more competition. But at the same time, with pressure comes creativity, right? So I also think that the way we travel will change fundamentally in 5 to 10 years. I think it's probably more 5 than 10.
And is it a blessing or a curse for you as a lawyer?
If you think about job security, I think it's not lasting.
Well, there you have it. Minister, we started with you. We're going to end with you. Also, give us your predictions. We're talking about global cooperation in a multipolar age from Greece's perspective, from Europe's perspective, from the West's perspective, where are still a lot of untapped potential, not just around this table, but globally, that you see as Minister of Economy and Finance?
I will reiterate exactly what you said in the question. I see lots of untapped potential in most of the relationships that we have with other states, with other countries. We have untapped potential within Europe. So by definition, we have untapped potential in the whole continuum of our relationships. But if I am to end with one message, it would be that we all need to become more ambitious. We need a mindset leap, a mindset change vis-à-vis what we can achieve. And if we don't, we will end up behaving as if we are in the camera market before the iPhone has come. And this is an existential danger if you think in static terms. We should become much more dynamic, be that the way we perceive the banking system, be that the way we perceive ourselves, the policy apparatus of countries. The speed is different, the rate of change is different. We need to adapt differently.
Yeah, certainly. Let's not be the Nokia. Let's not be the Nokia around the table. But I think point is very, very well taken. And I think you also, your serious side note about, first of all, we also need to focus on maximizing potential even here within Europe. Just the fact that we haven't done so on this continent, I think, speaks volumes. Redefining global cooperation in a multipolar age, ladies and gentlemen. I think I speak for all here when I say the Berlin Global Dialogue started very strong on day one, and I think I speak for all when I say it ended very strong here with a very solid, very insightful discussion. To the minister, to Funeka, Fernando, and Maria, so much appreciation. This is your applause. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much.
And before we part, I do have to say I have the honor to close day one, because this is the closure of day one of the Berlin Global Dialogue. Needless to say, we have 2 more days packed, filled with great discussions and equally insightful speakers. For now, the only task I was giving is to say that there will be drinks outside, time to network. Enjoy, and see you back here tomorrow morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.